Hello there, I am Kyle Russell of crystalconcentrics.com. That's my healing modality site and service. And Powerstone Crystals, which is my crystal sales arm, if you will. And I am broadcasting to you from my new room, which is it's off of my showroom. And it's a nice healing space which happens to be colored yellow. And this webinar is called Crystals, Yellow Stones, and it's part of my Why It's Awesome series. So basically the Why It's Awesome series is all about grouping a small number of stones to really talk about what makes them special in a context that's not just geological or metaphysical, but in a way which sort of gives you knowledge about the stones in a way that you can apply to yourself, to your own life. And I've worked in a Q&A for these events. So when they're live, you can type in your questions. There's a text box off on the side of the screen, and you should feel free to type in whatever questions you have. And as soon as we finish with the sort of instructional aspect of the webinar, we move into the Q&A section and try to address as many of your questions as we can in real time. I'm holding a gigantic piece of natural Baltic amber, which I'm actually going to come back to in a few minutes, because I wanted to start with this right here. Okay, this thing I'm holding is a orange calcite, and I debated whether orange calcite was appropriate to talk about in a webinar about yellow stones. But recently, what happens actually in general with the crystal business is there are cycles or phases where certain types of stones get either found or commercialized, and then they become all the rage. They're very available, can sometimes be very cheap, but then, as I've learned from 25, 30 years in the business, they disappear from view. And part of what my job is to hold on to some of the special pieces, either set them aside for my individual sessions or my group meditations and classes, or if I'm selling them, to put a premium on them, because I have a feeling that in the long run, this is going to be a bit of a rarity. Now, orange calcite is not that powerful, especially in small doses like this, although it's nice to wear. I'm going to show you a piece right here, which is maybe the best piece of orange calcite that I've ever come across. And when you get a larger piece like this, notice this is yellower, and then we come down into the deeper orange colors. And orange basically takes you out of our topic tonight, which is yellow stones and is associated with the solar plexus chakra, and pulls the energy down a little bit lower. So the orange actually appeals more to digestion and soothing. It has a bit of more of an emotional aspect to it. At the same time, in my energy system, my human energy systems, and I'm going to show you over on the side here, I have a poster that I've developed. The poster features 29 stones that are directly associated with the human energy zones, and I've reduced them from the general chakra count of around 7 to 4. And the solar plexus is at the top of and the beginning of the foundation energy zone. And the foundation energy zones goes from our solar plexus right down to the lower chakras. And not all of the stones we're going to talk about in this webinar are featured on the poster, and I'm thinking of adding a few of them. But I don't think calcite will make it, because calcite actually consists of what I call the fifth element. All right, the fifth element among crystals are power stones that don't automatically or directly associate with the human body energy system. They can be used on the body or with the body, but they're not sort of incarnations of specific chakra system energies. So the reason I'm showing you this is because sometimes when calcite is rough, they wash it in acid, and it takes away the kind of flakiness that often happens with calcite. It gives it a very, very soft to the touch feel, so that it's automatically soothing. Again, I was talking about orange, goes down a little bit, more of a body thing. But the solar plexus is a very interesting chakra energy point. And just in case you're new to this and you're not familiar with the chakras or how they relate to crystals, my language of crystals directly associates with the chakra system, because I believe that crystal energies and their attractiveness are great, but if there's no way for us to readily incorporate them into our own sort of healing and wellness program, then they're just an ornament on the shelf. And so I find that that's not the best way to use them, given that my view is crystals harness, they house certain natural energies and are therefore available and ready for us to use them for our own purposes and with other people. So the reason why I brought this piece in is that you'll notice it's almost like fingers pointing. And as such, any such sort of elongated power stone has a way of transmitting energy in a certain direction. So this is a bit of a wand. And I want to focus more now on the explicitly yellow stones. I want to move to amber. Okay, this is your classic Baltic amber. It's sort of the gold standard of ambers. It comes from Europe. It dates back about 60 million years. It's not to be confused with copal, which people often call amber. Copal is about half as old. It's only 30 million years old. It's much lighter, and although it's cool and sometimes the shapes can be evocative, they're not as energetically useful as real amber can be. Okay, so amber has a certain lightness to it. It's light in color and it's light in feel. And the reason why the solar plexus is associated with the color yellow is that when the chakra system was devised, it followed a color scheme which is exactly the same color scheme as the rainbow. So when we come up with our human categorizations and energy systems that we believe in, we often base those, just like astrology is based on the position of the stars, the chakra system is also based on the graduated energies moving from red up through orange and yellow and green, blue, purple, that sort of progression of frequency, which is mimicked in nature, we apply to our own systems of understanding how energies work in the human body, and in my case also with the stones. Now, one thing that I did not do last time, which I want to make a point of doing now, is to say that just because I have come up with an understanding about something does not mean that you have to believe it, or that you've arrived or should ever arrive at that same point of logic. There's a wealth of books and opinions out there about which crystals do what, and what you need to do is pick and choose who it is that you want to work with or who you relate to in terms of how they talk about crystals. And in my case, I have my information sort of downloaded. I did a webinar about that. I have my poster here. You can actually click on it to order it if you like. It should open up in another screen. It lists 29 of the crystals that are associated with the human energy system. And you'll see in the middle you've got amber. And amber is a very light energy. It's very buoyant. Okay, so amber and other light stones like jet are ideal for clearing. They're not very personal. They don't have identity written all over them. They mostly have just plain function. They are a lighter energy, and when placed next to a heavier or denser energy, they help that denser energy elevate and be relieved. So the amber sort of represents a very light way of being. And I think that's a very wise way to interpret it, because the solar plexus is associated with the ego. And most people, when they talk about the ego, think of the ego as a heavy, kind of narcissistic, acquisitive thing. So in our talking about ego and the solar plexus, I want to introduce you first to amber, because amber contradicts that interpretation. And I'm going to show you two other pieces. This is actually called green amber. You see it has a slightly different hue. It has some bugs in it. It's a magnificent piece, pendant for jewelry. And I want to take you back to the gigantic Baltic amber. Here, it's very rare to find this type of material completely terminated, as it were. Of course, it's not a crystal per se. It's a fossilized tree resin or sap, and usually it's broken off somewhere. And so to find a piece that's not only round, which is a very wholesome geometric shape, but to also have it be sort of smooth all the way around is quite unusual and special. So this type of piece would be very nice if you were doing personal work, or if you were working with a client or a friend, to rest the amber on their solar plexus to lighten their spirit, lighten their mood. Now, another important stone, yellow stone, because that's what we're talking about, is pyrite. Now, people call pyrite fool's gold. I rather like this piece because it's quite nicely crystallized inside, but on the outside, it's been polished, smooth, with a little bit of the cluster peeking out. Okay, now pyrite comes in a number of different forms. That's a great one. It comes in cubic form like this, where it's in sort of squares or overlapping squares. In Spain, there are explicit and complete natural squares, cubes, that are lodged. They form right inside of the limestone. It's quite attractive and unique. This is another type of pyrite. I call this spherical pyrite. And each one of them has a slightly different energy to it. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to remove the offer of the poster now, because I want to show you something else. I'm going to keep holding this up here. I'm going to remove the offer of the poster, and I'm going to switch over to the webinars that I offer. And I'm going to share with you on another tab the archive that I have of my webinars. Now, a lot of these that are listed there are some of the longer ones. They may have started out like this one being offered for free, and then there's a fee associated with them, because in order for me to continue delivering you this type of content, I need to also keep my cash flow going, which means selling access to my webinars, or selling crystals, or collecting email names, so that we can build a relationship. And what you see here, you're the sort of early adopters, anyone who's just now seeing this webinar, you're the first people, and you've heard about it either through my newsletter or through Facebook. But what ends up happening is this webinar has a life beyond that, because I'm saving it. It's going to go up on YouTube. I'm going to ask people who see it there to subscribe. And in general, if you'd like to contact me, please write Kyle@crystalconcentrics.com. But moving right along, I want to tell you about pyrite. Pyrite has a very special quality because although it is yellow and associated with the solar plexus, it has to do with us taking up our place in the world. Okay? So when people say, those are big boots to fill, that means that the person who they're talking about, or that's a hard act to follow, that person that they're talking about has taken up a lot of space in the world. They have become a person of consequence. But we don't have to, and it's not my belief that because someone is famous or they're rich, that that makes them any better of a person. I believe that we all stand equal before God or universal spirit or whatever you want to call it. We're all born naked, and we all die just like everyone else dies. And that is a great sort of equalizer. And what the pyrite helps us to do is to both identify and step into the space, the place, the persona that we are meant to manifest in this lifetime. Okay? So how that looks and how that shows up is going to be different for different people. But pyrite is very, very powerful and useful in that regard. It took me a while to get to know it. Some of these stones are much more obscure, they're much more advanced, they're much less accessible than others. But I'm happy to say that in the past couple of years, I've really come to know and love pyrite. Now, what I'm going to do next is switch over to the next stone I want to talk about. And you can kind of see it here. This is something that you often find in shops, and it's being sold as citrine, but it is baked amethyst. And they just take the clusters and they heat treat them, and it turns them from a lighter color, or purple in that case, over to a sort of ochre orange color. And that's great if you want to dip down a little lower into the belly chakra. That's kind of useful. But if you want to work with the solar plexus, it's one of the only energy zones that's kind of picky about the color that is associated with it. And that color is gold, which is the color of a true citrine. So this gigantic citrine here is double terminated. It has a little mountain range at the top here, and it's also self-healed on the bottom. I don't know if you can see, but those are little terminations there on the bottom. I don't know if I'm going to get the light just right on it. But what's great about self-healing crystals is that they're symbolic of self-healing people. Because I was talking to a doctor just the other day, and the doctor was talking about a patient's innate health. The idea that we are intrinsically in a state of good health and wellness. And that can be true even if we're aged or dying or very ill. It's possible to be ill and well at the same time because you're at one with the place that you're at. You're not in conflict or opposition with your state of being. Now, what's interesting about the solar plexus is that it, like the heart chakra, are kind of the fulcrums, the turning points, the axis between body and mind. And even the voice is the same way. They're all subtle differences in which we as human beings balance the more etheric, esoteric, intellectual aspects of our being with the more guttural, more silent, more deep, more physical, but often no less passionate aspects of ourselves. So citrine is representative of the positive ego, okay? The ego that is not caught up in narcissistic behavior or selfish behavior. It's the best self. So when you're seeing those other aspects of ego, what you're seeing is a masked or clouded or perverted sense and manifestation of the positive ego. The citrine, fortunately, is very pure and represents only the best that our self has to offer. And because of that, many people are estranged from who they really are or where they're really rooted, where their identity is. And so by focusing on one of the more esoteric or advanced stones, like a true and natural citrine, you can work towards understanding much better who your true self is before you go express it through the voice chakra, or before you introduce people into a romance with you through the heart chakra. It's very important to be clear and to be very pure in your understanding about who you are, and citrine, natural citrine, happens to be the very, very best tool for that. It's quite rare. If clear quartz is a 10 in terms of availability, citrine is maybe a 1 and smoky quartz is maybe a 3. But we could talk about the different relative qualities and availabilities of quartz in my Wonders of Quartz webinar or programs. So I'm going to put that down because the last piece I want to show you, I'm actually going to cover it up a little bit because I want to talk about it first. We had mentioned earlier, or I had mentioned earlier, the idea of geometric shapes. And I have always believed, but am increasingly convinced, that the pyramid in the octahedron are actually the highest levels of geometric shape. The circle, of course, is very competitive with that, because the circle is, after all, omnidirectional. It brings us all the way in and it takes us all the way out. So I do love the circle. But what I find interesting about the octahedron, and I'm going to show you one right now, this is a partial octahedron. You can see the pyramid on top. And then over here, you can see that it's very beginning to tend towards being a true octahedron. I have another one here. And what's fun about these natural pyramids, which are tending, as I say, towards octahedralism, is that they were totally new and unknown to my Inner Circle meditation group, which was a real thrill for me, a real joy to sort of share with them. You'll notice you've got your orangey color and you've got your yellowy color. This stone, which I hadn't identified earlier, is called scheelite, okay? Scheelite, S-C-H-E-E-L-I-T-E, okay? Scheelite is a very, very special stone. It's quite heavy. It's very dense. And so whenever I see, using my language of crystals, whenever I see some translucency, I think spirit. Whenever I feel density, I think groundedness, okay? There are 3 gateways into the soul as far as our understanding of crystals. One is our eyesight, what we see. Another is our touch, how it feels, what the texture is, what the weight and density is. And the third way for us to sort of interact with, because working with crystals is not a spectator sport. Working with crystals ought to be a participatory sport, all right? So that third thing that you need to engage in order to really work with crystals effectively or enjoyably is to use your imagination, to let what you know and what you've learned about the crystals filter back and forth between your eyes and your hands and your mind, and of course all of your entire chakra system, because each one of your chakras contributes. Each one of your chakras, just like this new movie that came out recently about the different emotions that are inside of our decision making and our worldview. Those different emotions are just like your different chakras. They all speak and have an opinion about whatever it is that you're doing. But what's great about octahedrons is they represent an energy moving up to or beaming down from the sky, and an opposite energy that is beaming up to the sky or funneling energy down from the sky. Okay? So sky is another way of saying heaven, and what's below, what's lower, is earth. So heaven and earth. Earth representing our physical body and heaven representing our etheric body are united in this upper pyramid that connects with the lower pyramid. And the Scheelite is tending towards octahedralism. And I'm not going to talk about the other major octahedron in the mineral family. There are actually several, and I might as well just tell you because they're all great. There's diamonds, there's spinel, and there's also the fluorites can form in this same sort of pyramidal shape. And so what this does, remember I talked about calcite as being kind of rooted down into your body and soothing and soft. I talked about amber, which represents a sort of humility and lightness of being that is non-personal, having to do with your ego and your solar plexus. I talked about pyrite, which has to do with taking up your space and sort of owning your position and state and destiny in the world. And then I talked about citrine, true citrine, which has to do with the positive ego, who we really are meant to be. It's informed by spirit and it's informed by body, but it has its own sort of balanced central position in the sort of cosmos of who we are energetically. And so when you introduce the Scheelite, you take this solar plexus conversation beyond here up to the sun and into a grander energetic place that is more inclusive of the world, particularly the best aspects of the superego of the entire universe. And we're echoing that back into our own selves, into our own, this is like sort of our energetic umbilical cord to the universe. So that's a lot of information. I'm going to remove my offer here, and I'm going to switch over to the chat room because I'm hoping that you can, I'm going to list your messages as private so you can write me directly, and feel free to submit any questions. That sort of concluded my sort of instructional address. And again, I want to remind you, you can email me, Kyle@Crystal Concentrics. I'm here actually in my showroom complex in one of the healing rooms, and it's yellow because today's conversation is all about yellow, the solar plexus. And I want to, here's a question. So the question here is about whether natural stones are different than, like, say, a rough crystal like this. Like, is the energy on this natural stone different than what you might see at a store, like if you saw a piece of jewelry? It's a great question. And What I would say about that is, yes, the energies are different. Generally, in a piece of jewelry, the energy is so tiny that unless you're just sort of mooching off of that energy by wearing it, as in this case with me, because you want to have that energy sort of accompany you wherever you go throughout your day, then you're going to do better in terms of a more conscious interaction with a crystal by getting a larger piece, either a big piece like this or a good palm-sized piece like that, because that way you're going to increase your skin contact. And I mentioned that touch is one of the primary ways that we can interact with crystals. That touch, that the skin is the largest organ in our body, or on our body, of our body. I suppose the only thing bigger than our skin is our aura, because it takes up more space, and our aura sort of dips in as well as dipping out. And the skin is a set of nerve endings that is just under the surface here. So I would recommend that if you have jewelry that you love, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you want to take time to meditate and really sit and absorb and focus on the energy of a crystal, it's better to get a bigger piece and a natural piece. That does not mean that I'm opposed to polishing. This is an example of a polished amber. And the fact is that as beautiful as a piece like this is, and it does have a great matte feel to it, that when you polish a crystal or a stone or power stone, whatever, you're able to sort of access that inner energy of the stone, which if it were rougher would be a whole lot harder to get into. I recommend that with rose quartz. Fluorites can be that way. A lot of stones are great in natural crystallized form, but if you can get them polished, there's nothing wrong with that. So that sort of answers the question. Oh, here's another one. Another question that I have been asked, which is kind of important, is how do you tell real crystals from fake crystals? Well, the good news is that most of the crystals that you find at a crystal shop or at a crystal show, an expo or whatnot, most of those are, they're too cheap to be worth faking. With the exception of this type of situation, where you've got the heat-treated amethyst that turns into the faux citrine, as I call it. Most of the stones out there you're getting are real. There are treated stones. There's the aura stones, which change color and become very artificial looking. They lose their original energy. So that's too bad if what you were looking for was a quartz energy. But with an aura quartz, you're getting something totally new and different. So I don't poo-poo treated stones. They all have their purpose. You just need to use your understanding of the language of crystals in order to make that interpretation. Some people just go by the books. I believe that if you can teach yourself or follow a teacher, someone like myself, and that you resonate with where I'm coming from, it'll help you to understand what you're seeing out there in the world. So here's some nice questions. I've got a curiosity about scheelite. If I can elaborate about what it does. Okay, now the whole question about what does a crystal do always sends me, because I'm actually working on a blog about it, because even though it's a perfectly innocent question and it's a reasonable question, you want to know, what does the crystal do? But the way in which I want to change or modify or impact how you think about that question is, crystals are not tools like a dental drill. Crystals are vibrating at their own frequency. Before we discovered them and decided to mine them and introduce them into our healing systems and use them on and with people, they were minding their business. Crystals intrinsically don't necessarily care about us at all. They were created millions of years before us, and they'll be here after we're gone. So it's important for us to humble ourselves and not think of them as a tool, something that was created by humans for use, and then it'll stop working like a car, and then we'll discard it in the junkyard. If all of our civilization crumbled and all the rubble, inside of all the rubble you were able to find a piece like this, you would realize that this was the original creation far before any human creation. So just to answer the question of what it does, what Scheelite does is it enables us to be in the presence of the octahedron, however imperfectly formed. So in this situation, you've got the pyramid is going up, but there's no pyramid underneath. But that doesn't mean that the crystal wasn't tending towards that. We're the same way. We're flawed in our own efforts to manifest our own highest destiny. But we have to appreciate the fact that our goal, our ambition, our hope and wish is to reach that higher level of manifestation and fulfillment. So when you ask what is Scheelite good for, I would say it's good for us stepping into that grander view of ourselves. It's good in the sense of appreciating your positive ego, but also thinking about its own true full manifestation. That's kind of the best answer that I can think of for now. So octahedron, somebody asked me to spell octahedron. O-C-T-A-H-E-D-R-O-N. Octahedron. I think, unless there's an O in there, but I've actually done spell check on it a few times, and I'm pretty sure it's an A. So that'll help. So I'm seeing here a question. I have a gold piece of hematite in the shape of an octagon. How will hematite work for the whole solar plexus? Now, unfortunately, the way in which this chat box is showing here, it's not showing. There's another question that's higher up. So ask your question again. I might not be able to see it because of the way the technology is working. But I would have to see the hematite in order to know really what color it is, because I have seen pyrite covered in limonite, which is kind of golden also. And hematite tends universally to be gray or metallic. So if I were to see it and agree with you, yes, in fact, that's a hematite, basically any stone that is yellow can be interpreted in view of the solar plexus. Now with hematite, you have the gravity, you have the weight of the scheelite, but it's not translucent. It's not truly crystallized, although hematite does crystallize, but it's unlikely that it would be in an octahedron. Pyrite can tend to form in pyramids also, which is kind of great. But again, you know, that's why I put my email out there, Kyle@CrystalConcentrics. Shoot me an email. I'd love to have a look, or connect with me through Facebook. You could send me pictures there, and I'd be happy to help interpret that. So here's a question. Ooh, yellow lepidolite, and how it works with the solar plexus too. I have this is Sarah, and I think you're the same Sarah. We talked through my call-in. I have this great call-in podcast that begins as a live phone-in situation with Q&A just like this. And I do that with True to You Radio, and that's going to also be available independently. I put information and links about that in my newsletter. That's why it's so important that you take me off your spam list, put me in your address book, and make sure that when I send out my newsletters, usually it's Sunday nights, but not every week, that I can let you know about these great resources, many of them free, like this webinar, that you can partake of and enjoy. So the question was about yellow lepidolite, and lepidolite is interesting because a lot of stones will appear in multiple different colors, and those different colors will have radically different implications for what those stones can do for you. Lepidolite, 9 times out of 10, is going to be purple, and purple is higher up, has to do with our spirit mission, but it's also not translucent. It's not crystallized in a see-through kind of way. So even though it is crystallized, usually it's microcrystals or sheets. And golden lepidolite would seem to connect. There's often arcs between the different chakras, and the stones help bridge that arc between, say, purple lepidolite and the golden lepidolite. So imagine a stone that could connect your own best sense of self and superego with the spirit world and your priorities in terms of your mission. And it sort of helps create a feedback loop of communication for you to fine-tune your own understanding about what you're here and meant to do energetically. So that would be my answer about the lepidolite. Here's a question. Do you think that a stone that has been artificially shaped loses its power in any way or perhaps enhances it? Well, I did mention earlier that I actually have nothing against polished stones. I think some stones work better when they're polished, and some stones work better when they're natural. In the case of shaped stones, I think the shape usually has the effect of enhancing what the stone is capable of doing. So if the stone is round like this, it has that sort of balanced, omnipresent energy of a sphere. If it has been cut, in this case it was broken out of a cluster, but if a stone is elongated like this, or if it's cut into this shape, then what that tends to do is enable you to sort of focus and beam that energy through the crystal in a directional kind of way. All right, so I would say that the shape does make a difference, and it does enhance it. There are probably examples of cases where it doesn't really make any difference, or it doesn't enhance it, but I'd have to see it or work with it or hold it or somehow get familiar with it to understand whether that was a piece that was enhanced by having been shaped or not. But generally, it's a creative addition to the experience that we're capable of having through working with that stone. So there's one of those questions. I've got a thank you up there, people enjoying it. I am winding down because these events are generally about 45 minutes. So I want to remind you to check out my websites, crystalconcentrics.com or powerstonecrystals.com, and also look for my YouTube channel and my Twitter and Instagram. I'm on all of these different services. I would love to hear from you, Kyle at crystalconcentrics.com. So if I don't see any new questions popping up on the side here, I'm going to start winding down our Crystals Yellow Stones webinar, which is part of the ongoing Why It's Awesome series. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to all of those of you who hadn't heard about it, who are watching the replay, who are just finding out about this, months and months from now when this was recorded through one of the different sort of social media outreach networks that I have going out there. All right, so thanks again. I'm Kyle Russell. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to seeing you next time.